Roll up, roll up. The Qatargate circus is back in town. This is a special show, a special Sunday evening show that will obviously be recorded to play. You can watch it whenever you want because, this is a really big topic. And this stream is actually kind of going back to its roots. I started doing these YouTube streams on Qatargate and I'm returning to that story because Eva Kaili has seen an interview that she did. We'll call it an interview. There's a video that's been published by El Mundo, the Spanish outlet. It's a newspaper and they've published it on their YouTube and their video channels where she talks about this case. It's really super, extremely interesting. The narrative that she's painting, the way she's playing this story. We've also had an article released by Corriere della Sera, the Italian newspaper, which she gave, it says in their interview, before the restrictions on her speaking to the press were put on her. The judge in the Qatargate scandal has said that Eva Kaili is not allowed to speak to the press. Now, there is tons to dig into on this. There's so much to talk about. It's for anybody who's watched or followed or is, on the Qatargate story, there's just so much coming up about this, which is really interesting and also significant. So that's why I decided to go back to the roots and do this stream on a sort of off day. And to do so, I've got a guest with me, who is Alex Cadier, who is the FSN Feature Story News' Brussels correspondent. Hey, Alex, thanks for sharing your evening with me.
A pleasure.
It's really good to see you. And the reason that Alex is going to join as well is because he knows a thing or two about big political interviews, and it's complex, this one. Alex, what I think we'll do is we'll start by playing. I'm going to play 30 seconds of the interview that Eva Kaili gave. It's stylistically extremely interesting, and content-wise, we'll go through what she said. It's like nearly a 5-minute interview. We'll just play 30 seconds of it because I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to play under broadcasting rules on YouTube. So we'll just play it. I think it's important for everyone to just kind of see what it looks like. So here we go.
I was just trying to stay calm. The first 2 days they locked the apartment and they didn't care where the baby was and I couldn't contact my family. Isn't it insane? They say whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Yes, I will never forget that day. And I remember we wake up, we had some work to do.
So this is the sort of choppy. I'm gonna leave it up there. Actually, I'm gonna bring it up. I want to just. Oh, where is it? Here we go. Oh no, how can I do it? There's all these different options. Add to stream. There we go. Right, I'm going to put it like that. There we go. So we're on it. So firstly, I'm obsessed with the microwave in the background. I find that so funny. Secondly, she looks amazing. Like this is a Netflix-style staged interview. The dramatic music, the sort of punchy, choppy comments, right? Stylistically, this is incredible. Alex.
Yeah, I mean, that was my first instinct. It seems to be the similar format to what Netflix gave Harry and Meghan when they did their rather extensive series about our version of events, putting our version forward. And so you have this completely one-sided monologue from someone who's been accused of money laundering and corruption at a very, very high level by the Belgian authorities. So there's a real question there on my end of where's the challenge? Where is the pushback on all these statements that she's making? She starts, quite understandably, there will have been a lot of difficult moments with her young daughter, with her family, worrying about that. These are all fair points to make, but there's an immediate empathy piece. There's an immediate she's the victim here narrative from the off, and no pushback, no journalist in the room. So quite a strange format for someone accused of something quite so serious.
It is a kind of victim interview. You're right. It's really interesting. We're going to get into the content of this, but I think the first thing, I need to go there because I have it on extremely good authority that Eva Kaili, she obviously knew that she was being filmed for this. There's no question about that. She is sat in her house, presumably in a setup with a big camera. There are big lights going on there. There's a team of people behind that camera. So she knew it was happening. But I understand that she filmed this with the expectation that this interview would not be published until after the restriction on her speaking to the press was lifted. As journalists, Alex, we do interviews sometimes, and we are told they are under embargo. So you film the interview and it's not allowed to be released until a press release has gone out, a public statement has happened, a court date has happened. This happens all the time, right? So, I mean, but what the suggestion is that El Mundo maybe have broken that embargo, broken their agreement with her.
Well, I mean, I don't know exactly where that information comes from, but as a rule of thumb, generally, okay. Well, then you always have incredibly reliable sources, so I have no reason to doubt you and your journalistic integrity, as it were, in this particular situation. I would always be really skeptical of anyone claiming, well, I had this kind of agreement with, unless it's a clear embargo written in the press release, then we respect that. But there's a degree of skepticism. If an interviewee says, or anyone close or whatever says, well, this wasn't supposed to be published, I would tend to go with some skepticism if it makes them look bad. Because, well, actually what happened is that the interview got out, they're quite cross with the outcome, they now say, well, we had a deal, da, da, da. I can't imagine that is the case here, because this actually works so completely in Eva Kaili's favor. This kind of...
Why? To have
it works in her favor. It works in her favor because the first 30 seconds that we've just seen, we think, gosh, she had a young daughter and they locked the apartment and didn't care about... Horrible. These awful, in her words, insane Belgian prosecutors. How rude, how mean, how cruel. We don't really understand the full story. She's been prevented from speaking to the press. We can't even get her side of the story. So there's this aspect of
statement, though. I think I'm in favor of that statement. They should have allowed, like, banning her from speaking to the press feels quite weird.
Yeah, banning someone to speak from the press who's not actually been convicted of anything yet sets a really dangerous precedent. There's no question about that. I agree with you completely, but hopefully speaking to the press in a way where she can be challenged on the allegations, where people can push her and not, as we saw from El Mundo's first question, ask her how she got to the top of the European Parliament. Now, she's a politician. She's done millions of interviews. She can be exposed to robust questioning. We can come back to that, I'm sure.
Yeah. I'm going to bring in that article. Actually, we're going to bring that up any second. Firstly, though, this is actually a point. This is something I did. One of the first streams I did on this YouTube channel was about whether she should still be in prison. I spoke to a load of people, some legal experts who suggested that it was being used as a punitive measure to keep her 4 months away from her daughter. A very famous journalist for Libération, Jean Quatremer, came on, thought it was completely outrageous that she was held. Some other Greek journalists were talking about how badly she was doing and that she was struggling in prison. And I was accused, I had not many, but I had the accusation leveled at me that I was sort of like, on Eva Kaili's side, and I was trying to, get her released. And honestly, I have no interest in any of that. I have no dog in that fight. I've come across Eva Kaili in the European Parliament in my sort of 9-10 years here in Brussels. Don't really know her. I've interviewed her once or twice, I think. And this is it. This is an interesting thing where the suggestion is swirling around of what is happening to her and the control of the narrative and the way in which it happens. You mentioned, Alex, the article that was published alongside Eva Kaili, and this is it. So this is an English translation. I don't think anyone's going to actually be able to see it, but it's sort of relevant that we bring it up. As you say, the first question was something like, okay, you're known for Qatargate now, but why? How did you reach the upper echelons of?
I've got the translation, which is, you have risen to fame for Qatargate, but very little is known about you. How did you get to the top of the European Parliament? That's not exactly a hardball.
First, not at all. And firstly, it's a really interesting take because, okay, she, I think, won her seat in Greece in the Thessaloniki area with like the highest number of votes of any politician in the European Parliament. She is a star in Brussels. She does a lot of digital legislation she has done. She may not be internationally famous, but she's very well known in EU circles. It's a bizarre question to start on. I agree. Not to slag. I'm always a bit loath to like slag off other people's reporting, because you can slag off a lot of the stuff I do, I'm sure, as well. But it's a really. I wonder though, Alex, whether you think that perhaps they did this to soften the blow of breaking the embargo that they'd agreed with her.
I was going to go a different way with it. So, as you mentioned, I've done and produced a lot of political interviews in my time. Much more so in the UK. I'm still relatively new to Brussels, but that includes prime ministers, cabinet ministers, kind of high level. And there's always some level of transaction there, particularly in broadcast, where that if you're interviewing the prime minister and it's crime day for the prime minister that day, you ask about their new crime policies, because then you can ask them about other stuff. There's an element of transaction there. I read that and I thought, interesting interview technique. Maybe they're going for the really easy build trust, build confidence questions. So Eva Kaili gets comfortable and then ambush with, what about this allegation? What about the bags of cash? What about your father with the cash, etc.? What about the allegations from the Belgian prosecutor? But that never happened. So that was my assumption. Whether or not I think if you break the embargo, you break the embargo. I don't think they're trying to do a kind of, we're going to do this, but sorry,
I agree with you as well. And one of the things with like when you do a print interview, you do often have to do it in the order in which you do it. That's the sort of agreement. But you can do like top line sections where you sort of lead on a headline, so that the first question, you lead with the hard stuff and then you show that you put the softball question in. A lot of editors I've worked with would be like, get that first question out as well. And you can do that. We do that in TV and radio everywhere. You can just cut questions. So that's go on.
I also think there's a level of expectation management there. If you're a journalist interviewing Eva Kaili, the first time she can speak, she's not going to be surprised if your first question is, are you corrupt? Right. It's not exactly a kind of like, oh, how dare you? Where are you getting this from? Right? She's also a very experienced politician who's done a lot of media. She won't be thrown by someone.
She's also a former journalist. Like she's been on our side, So yeah, it was an interesting take. We don't know exactly why that was decided. Okay, so we've gone on long enough on the sort of media thing. Let's start to talk through some of the claims. As I say, her claim is that I understand that she is not meant to be let's start with this. The claim is that she's innocent. She has protested her innocence from the very beginning of this. There is no question about that. We're going to work through the claims in the El Mundo article, and then we'll go on to the Corriere della Sera. I can never say that because there's some really interesting stuff in there. So she basically in the video. I'm loath to call it an interview because there's a bit of challenge with an off-screen journalist who I don't know who it is, but we'll call it a video interview, whatever. She sort of claims that Antonio Panzeri, who's sort of seen as this linchpin in the Qatargate scandal, who was distributing money to everyone alongside Francesco Giorgi, who is her partner, who she has a child with, was coming through into Francesco Giorgi's office, picking up bags from the airport. She never questioned them. She never looked through her husband's. She calls him her husband, which is interesting as well, because we've been sort of reporting on life partner and stuff. So presumably they are married or something, that he picked up bags on his way through, that she did know that there was money inside them, but she thought it was something to do. This comes in the Corriere della Sera interview, actually, that she thought that money was just to do with their NGO work. She also claims that the whole Qatargate scandal comes from the Pegasus the Pegasus scandal. Now, this is hard, but we've got to go into this. So, the Pegasus scandal is a claim in Greek politics that the Secret Service in Greece it's not a claim, it's proven, was using Pegasus software predator software, right? Yeah, to spy on the leader of the PASOK party, who's her boss. Oh, I've got to bring his name up now. I should know this. I can't It's Crystal. He's an MEP, and I can't get it off the tip of my tongue. Anyway, the leader of her political party. I'm going to find it. You're going to find it. You're googling it. Can you Google it for me while we do
I'll
this?
get it.
Have you got it? What's his surname?
Bear with me.
I know it begins with an A, but I interviewed someone in Greece recently called who has a name that begins with A, and I want to say his name, but I also don't want to bring his name into the scandal. It's the only name I've got on the top of my tongue. Anyway, so the investigation essentially that Pegasus was being used, she claims, by Belgian secret services, this is in the Correspondent interview, to spy on members of committees in the European Parliament, and that this is where it all comes from. That is super, super interesting. She claims that it was related to Moroccan work in the European Parliament. Have you got the name?
Not yet. I'm actually just looking at the story in general. But what Nikos Androulakis, I think, is the name you're looking for.
Yeah.
Leader of the Parrock party.
No, it's Androulakis. Yeah. This is really bad of me. This is bad journalism. Sorry, everyone.
Well, we can do an episode on me stating you for your journalism if you want.
I know, I have Greek connections as well. Yeah, we can also do that. Oh dear. Anyway, so let's stay on focus, because the interview that she claims started from Pegasus, basically Belgian security services looking into what members of the European Parliament. This is how Eva Kaili is trying to frame this, essentially, that this is, even aside from the Qatargate scandal, that this is a scandal of surveillance of work of elected politicians. Alex, is that a good narrative for her to paint?
It's a narrative. Instinctively, there's a moment of seeing that, and again, this goes back to the questions that were asked. That being interesting and important and worth looking into and worth investigating, but not the matter at hand. And there's a bit of an inconsistency in some of her responses. She says, we have indications that the entire Pegasus committee was being spied on, specifically political activities related to Spain and Morocco, but nothing related to Qatar. And then she thinks the argument she makes is that the intelligence services have found not enough information about Morocco, and therefore or the Belgian prosecutors, I should say, moved their target onto affairs relating to Qatar. And it seems like an interesting, unrelated topic in many ways. It's related to her political activities, but the accusations, and Jack, you've been following this story even closer than I have, but the accusations don't seem directly related to that. It seems much more related to kind of, saying positive things about Qatar, about Morocco ahead of the World Cup, particularly for Qatar. Those are the allegations leveled against her. So this Pegasus scandal, if I were to be extremely cynical, and I'm a little bit loath to go there, but if I were to be extremely cynical, having, as I said, produced political interviews with, including others, but Boris Johnson in particular, who was very, very good at, well, you're asking me about this. Well, here's this other really big thing that you should care about. There's a level of skepticism that I feel about what I'm sure is a particularly interesting story, but does not feel, at least from what I can tell at these early stages, directly related. Particularly if you're interviewing Eva Kaili, the first interview after her release, letting the interview go in that direction seems like a bit of a missed opportunity. I don't know what your take on that is.
So this Pegasus stuff is interesting to me, because if it is the case that the Belgian secret service, intelligence services, were spying on Eva Kaili and others in that committee, then they would have information, presumably, that implicates her in the Qatargate stuff, that implicates her in the corruption, that makes it clear that she was involved. And if that's the case, why then would she be saying, why would she be using this as a tactic? Why would she be bringing this up?
So to venture in to what is clearly speculation at this point. There's one line in the El Mundo interview, the print interview, that I thought was quite interesting, where she said, "The evidence of this stuff is in the possession of my lawyers." So if I were to speculate, there's possibly an element here of shoring up some kind of defense. So how did the Belgian prosecutors get evidence against Eva Kaili implicating her into the Qatargate scandal? Is there an element of cross-pollination between the Belgian security services, intelligence services, and the prosecutors investigating the Qatargate? In which case, was there improper evidence gathered by the Belgian prosecutors? Is that something that she's shoring up a defense for? Again, can only reiterate 1,000,001 times that we don't have the detailed information of what's going on behind closed doors for the prosecutor's office. All we can do is look at these little breadcrumbs that are being dropped in these interviews. But it's interesting, her denials are also quite, half denials really. When she's talking about the bags of cash and the money found, it's very much, it's the amount does not equate to our savings. She provides information that wasn't actually asked of her. Come look at my apartment. There's no gold, no jewelry, and there are none of my fingerprints on the cash. How do you know that? And how are you so confident that there are no fingerprints on the cash?
Well, she must be saying that because she hasn't touched it, and that may be the case. But also, we don't know where other money is going. It's a really interesting defense. Let's go through this. Let's go through some of the details. This is from between the articles as well. So, as I said, one of her other defenses is that she didn't know. She did know that there was money, but thought it was Panzeri's simply. And she also says that she didn't use her immunity, her parliamentary immunity, because she didn't think it had anything to do with her. And she thinks she would have invoked her parliamentary immunity. Difficult one, because invoking the parliamentary immunity is kind of an admission of guilt. Generally MEPs use immunity if they think that they're not going to get a fair trial, right? That for instance, the Catalonian MEPs use their immunity not to be sent back to Spain because they think that the case isn't going to be fair against them.
Or the immunity, or for the reason the immunity was put in the first place, which is to protect them from politically motivated judicial action. So there could be a very above board, legit reason to resist political pressure from outside actors, or to resist against vexatious legal claims constantly being put against members of the European Parliament. But the immunity question, I'm not enough of an expert to really wade into that.
No, it's a bizarre one. It's an interesting one that she would claim that. So also in some of the interviews across this, she claims that she had really bad conditions, that she was left without a coat, that she had a camera on her in prison. And from a lot of the Qatargate reporting, I've spoken to a lot of people about this, that the conditions in the Belgian jails are not very good. And for her, we'll get into it a little bit more, because she also claims that essentially that they were using, she says in the Cadier interview, that they were using her daughter to pressure her, and that was a ruthless act, that they basically tried to hold her daughter away from her. And this is it, like, they're building sympathy towards her for her daughter and stuff is certainly, it's hard to talk about this stuff because, like, as tactics, because it's really horrible to hear a mother not able to access her daughter. But now, after the fact, it does play in her favor to sort of build this up to make it look like the Belgian authorities were sort of really bad, essentially.
Yeah, I think if you isolate the things she said about her daughter, and I think one of the things that was particularly untenable about her detention is when she was the only one left,
right, and
was the only woman accused and the only woman still incarcerated. That was a moment where, quite rightly, people would have gone, "Hey," but there's two aspects here. If you isolate the really quite tragic and quite sad situation with her daughter, the conditions in Belgian prisons, and also laying out some of the abuses as she sees them of the Belgian judicial system. If I were her lawyers, I would be reading this interview going, tick, tick, Tick.
Yeah.
All the arguments that we need to mount a defense, everything that we want in the public domain to build sympathy, everything that we would want jurors to know about, great, it's out there. And again, this goes back to a real lack of accountability in Brussels in general, and the lack of accountability and pressure on what is supposed to be, the heart of European democracy. There's no pressure from the journalists pushing back, saying, well, hold on, you're not answering in great detail about these accusations. Sure, the bag in your house was Panzeri's, but what about the bag at the Sofitel in Brussels that your father was caught with, and that the Belgian authorities say you told him to take? What about that aspect? There's questions around that. So, these are all very fair points for her to make. She has to mount a defense. That's the way things work. But from a journalistic perspective, there's quite a bit lacking there, I'm afraid.
This is what's interesting. Like, understandably, she doesn't want to breach the press, the judge forbidding her from speaking to the press. But like you say, this does work in her favor, and she's allowed to film interviews if there's a piece of paper. I wonder if there's a piece of paper that's set, or an agreement in emails or something, that she can show to the judge that says that El Mundo went against the wishes and published it beforehand, and that would be interesting. But again, it doesn't really matter.
Which for her is is the best of all possible scenarios, right?
If that exists.
I recorded this interview explicitly telling them not to run it at all until the restrictions were lifted, and I cannot believe they've run it.
Yeah.
Perfect. She's not in trouble with the judge, and her lines are out there.
Exactly. And like you say, it makes her look good. It's painting the argument that she wants. Okay, so let's move on. So the fingerprints on the banknotes. Yeah, I'll prove my innocence, she says. So this case has been crazy, right? Like, I got my hands on the Panzeri transcripts, did an article for DW that actually kind of started this whole YouTube stream I'm doing. He claims in that there was 250,000 euros that were intended for Eva Kaili. And in the interview, they ask her what she thinks about that. She says, Panzeri's repentance and confessions were obtained under threat. The message was clear. If you name names, we'll offer you a deal and free your wife and daughter, Panzeri's wife and daughter, from prison. That is an interesting claim. That essentially, it's only him that directly implicates her in the transcripts. And that he's doing that under duress, knowing that she's already in prison. This is it's a big claim.
Yeah, and it goes along with two other claims, which is the bag was Panzeri's, and I don't go through any of my husband's stuff. Yeah. So there's a clear, well, I have absolutely nothing to do with any of this, and I have no knowledge of it. But even his claims have been made under duress. So it's covering all eventualities in her defense, which you would completely expect her to do in the face of the allegations against her.
Yeah, exactly. It's an interesting one. So the next thing, she talks about her meetings. One of the things when all this broke out, there was a weight of public opinion. Her meetings with the Qatari Labour Minister, her undeclared visits to the World Cup sites, the World Cup final, her speeches about Qatar and their brilliant labour reforms in the European Parliament that she made in the Strasbourg plenary. She basically said that this was all part of her work, that this was part of her job as a politician. And when all of this first broke out, I've been reporting this for a while, and I've spoken to some different legal experts about this for some time. It's okay. So there's the cash, right? There's bags of cash in her house with her father. There are her statements and her meetings with these Qatari ministers, etc. In politics, corruption is actually quite hard to prove. You have to prove that that money is directly connected to that speech. Legally, you have to prove that money that existed or changed hands is connected to something. It's why that you have to kind of be caught red-handed with the cash, which her father kind of was. And I've been saying for a long time, this is sort of laying it out there, and but behind closed doors, I have been saying that I think it's going to be really hard to convict Eva Kaili of these crimes for that reason. Not that it didn't happen. I have no other information that's what's in the public sphere and what's in the legal file. So maybe there is a smoking gun, for want of a better term, but we haven't, in my view, quite seen that yet. And I think she's now building this case, which is really interesting. I don't know if you agree. I don't know what you think of that. This is, again, speculation.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair assessment of how tricky this will be for the Belgian prosecutors. You spoke about being caught red-handed. You spoke about a smoking gun. Going back into the point I made earlier, again, purely speculative based on what we've read. Why would she be implicating Belgium's intelligence services now? Why would she be talking about Pegasus now? Is there an element there where she suspects that, or is anticipating a smoking gun, and is trying to prepare for, well, how was that obtained? Again, this is purely
and exactly
speculative.
If it's illegally obtained, it can't be put into court. Exactly. So it's so complex. It's so
and the battle that runs in parallel is the public opinion battle, right?
This is what I wanted to say. All of this case has been tried in the court of public opinion up until now. This is it, and will continue to be.
And I actually think there was an error from a comms perspective, at least from the Belgian judge, saying you can't speak to the press, because it makes the Belgian prosecutor's office seem insecure about their messaging or their ability to fight back on any kind of public statements. Why not have it out?
Yeah.
You give interviews, you speak to the press, you have a good communication strategy to make it clear that there are very serious allegations that need addressing. Instead, banning someone who's been convicted of nothing but accused of a lot from speaking to the press is a pretty dangerous, or pretty uncomfortable, at least, precedent to set. Irrespective of the fact that she might be a better media operator than the Belgian prosecutor's office, but then,
that I can attest to. The Belgian prosecutor, there's one guy, like, they need more people on this story. It's been absolutely crazy. On the busy moments, it's been almost impossible to get the information we need. So I agree with you on that. So this is it. So she claims that it is all done in the court of public opinion, like we've been saying, and there's so much information against her, so many claims, so many people. When I've reported on this, lock her up, lock her up, lock her up. She should be, put away. This is everyone does, even Panzeri, who's now admitted it, to be fair, but deserves a presumption of innocence in any legal system. Off the record, I've spoken to tons of people who think that this investigation is being done in a... Firstly, some of the questions have been around whether the people doing the investigations have any clear understanding of how the European Parliament works. And in order to build a case, they need to understand the difference between a directive, a regulation, the difference between a committee, a subcommittee, a working group. And that those things are actually really important to prove, like we said, the change in political mindset that can be connected to money. Also, there's been so many leaks, as we know, thankfully for us, but it's been like a really difficult and questionable series. And what she's doing is in this interview, she's playing into the understanding of that. And I think that will carry some weight. It will carry some weight going forward. So this is it. I mean, this is also the interesting thing about the Moroccans. In the Cadier interview, in the article, it says that the Belgian Secret Service would have put activities of the members of the Pegasus Special Committee under observation. That's it. She's claiming that it's the Pegasus, the people that were investigating the Pegasus scandal went under observation. And this is relating to illegal interceptions of European leaders made with Morocco. So it would have been Morocco-gate. A lot of people were saying it should have been about that. And we know from the Panzeri papers that he claims that Morocco was the first country that was giving them money. And just a sort of final point, you made a point I think on Twitter about this, saying that she really doesn't talk about Qatar in the interview or in the article that much.
No, she doesn't. And the more we talk about this, the more I sit here thinking, well, actually, this was a bit of a masterstroke on her end. This is kind of a triumph for her, because if there is a weakness in the Belgian prosecutor's case against her that she's aware of, and it's anywhere near the Pegasus scandal, she's basically fired a shot across the bow saying, by the way,
Right.
we're ready for this.
Mm.
And if that then leads to the collapse of the corruption case, which, as you rightly said, is very hard to pin down anyways, well, then we also have lines about how difficult it was in prison and how insane and awful it was for the prosecutors and the investigators to separate her from her child. So there's, it would, again, her lawyers, I suspect, will be quite pleased with the outcome of this interview. Now, you're absolutely right. There has to be a presumption of innocence throughout. I think one of the things, and I'm still relatively new to Brussels reporting, which means I, on the one hand, have to wade through things I am desperately trying to understand. On the other, I have a slightly different, less experienced, to not say mature perspective than you have. There seems to be a really weird wobbliness between the fact that the institution that has given her influence and power is entirely unable or has very little remit for investigating abuses of that power.
Mm.
It seems like a complete imbalance that the Belgian prosecutor is now being relied upon to investigate something that is, for the rest of the time, entirely out of its remit. It creates this environment where there is no European level accountability. It's then just dumped on a member state's desk. So I have kind of huge empathy for the Belgian prosecutor's office being expected to take this on when it's not something that they could, should, or want to be doing, or necessarily have. They probably have more experience than a lot of other jurisdictions in.
Well, they do. I mean, there's been scandals of this nature. There was the Maltese commissioner scandal a few, like 10, 15 years ago, whatever. They are aware of this and their law is ready for it. But you're right. They're not sort of primed and prepped for a big scandal. But remember, they did the investigation. They made these raids. They arrested these people and kept them in prison. That was the Belgians. So they have a obligation to uphold the legal system under which, and it is EU law, which is Belgian law as well. It's going to be really interesting to see what's going to happen. It's Nikos Androulakis, and I'm sorry to him for just. He's the leader of PASOK. He was spied upon by the Pegasus scandal. He's a really famous MEP, and just my brain just slipped him. And of course, we know who he is, but that's really an interesting angle as well. Like we say, this Pegasus scandal is huge news. This is actually a point I want to raise. The Pegasus scandal is a huge story in Greece, where she's from. And in order to be elected, she has to be elected in Greece. In order to clear her name, she has to clear her name in Greece. It doesn't really matter that much what happens in Brussels. To be honest, when you're a politician, you still have to play to your national electorate. If she can clear her name in Greece, she can clear her name pretty much everywhere, basically. If she can rehabilitate her reputation, which I think is a really long way off, but that is where she will start. And that is why it's interesting to bring that in. Also, just as another point, I understand from El Mundo that this is part one of this video, so we may have more from her. Maybe they won't publish it because of the issues about publishing it. Maybe they won't, but there could also be more. There's one other really interesting thing that I think as well, like, not to sort of lose journalistic sort of distance from this, but it's really interesting. But this is such a personal case. She is, okay, she's a sort of star of politics and journalism beforehand. She is a woman with a small child and a husband who's implicated in this scandal. Super scary for her. I'm not saying that that's okay and politicians should take money and stuff. There's one line in the Correspondent interview where they said to her, "How are you doing with Francesco Giorgi, her partner?" And she replied, "We'll find out over time. He's a great father to my daughter." I just think it's so heavy, like what is happening to them and what is going to happen as the court cases rumble on. It's going to be so complicated. And I know someone saw the pair of them, Georgie and Eva Kaili, on their balcony together a while ago, a week ago. A friend of mine saw them out on their balcony where they live. And that was kind of an interesting thing for me, that they're there in a house together with a child dealing with this scandal. Also, I've got so much I want to say about this, and I think we should start wrapping up. It's interesting to me that it's crucial for her to keep this in the public sphere, to keep people talking about this, even if people hate her. If this drops massively off of the news agenda, that isn't good for her. And also, I understood, I had it confirmed, just there's another thing that she wanted to have a meeting with Roberta Metsola, the president of the European Parliament. I actually interviewed Metsola for Deutsche Welle last week and asked her about it. She didn't seem very happy that I'd asked her about it, just said, no request has reached me, the investigation's ongoing, essentially. But that's also interesting that she wants to try and build those personal relationships in the European Parliament. And I think, despite whether she's scared and confused and worried about this, as she must be, it's kind of crazy what she's having to go through, Eva Kaili. It does work in her favor, probably, to keep this in the public sphere.
And to be fair to her, she hasn't had much of an opportunity to put her side forward before this, right? There was the investigation.
Yeah.
She was in prison. There was no communications. We heard from her lawyers, sure, but it wasn't a direct statement from her about how difficult it would have been personally. So there's an aspect of putting that out there which seems like a priority. If this is someone who is entirely innocent of what they're being accused of and have been, dragged through the mud by overzealous prosecutors, that's one option. The other is, well, how much public sympathy will there be if this actually all turns out to be true accusations? And it seems like part of her defense was bringing the difficult family situation into it, right? Where does the public sympathy lie if that's the outcome? But it is true to say that actually she hasn't had much of a chance to talk about any of this stuff publicly. And, there was mention of the family dynamic, certainly when it was, when she was the only one left in prison. That was pretty untenable for the Belgian authorities. But there's no question that, this is an element that she's put forward. It was probably, if I were a lawyer and advising her on a PR strategy, I'd probably advise her to talk about this as well. So
this is it.
I suspect it's probably not the last live stream that you're going to do about this.
And I'll have you back on for sure. Listen, I think we've gone on long enough. I honestly could go on for about another hour on this. There's so much to dig into it. I also it has fallen off the news agenda. I've been struggling to get Qatargate stories commissioned, to be honest with you, in major publications. And I'm not going to lie, pressing for the Kaili interview myself very, very hard, because that's the one that, and it's interesting to see that this is dropping away when it says so much about Brussels, so much about how we operate here. And so even if I'm the only one banging the drum on it, well, El Mundo and the Italians are doing it, but I'm going to keep going. I think it's important. I think because of what it says about European politics more broadly, because of how it shows what happens in Brussels, but also how we report on it, how much media storm and public, the court of public opinion, as we mentioned, affects this stuff. So we'll keep going. Thanks, Alex. I really appreciate you taking time.
Thanks,
it was awesome to have you on the show, buddy. Get back to your. It's still a bit of sun out. Go and have a nice glass of wine in the sun.
Cheers, Jack.
So there we go. Thanks so much to Alex, and thanks so much to everyone for joining. I really appreciate it. Put your comments in. Put your comments into the under the YouTube stream or on Twitter. Really interested to hear what people have to say about this, because I think it's really significant. And as I said, I want to keep this up. So like and subscribe. I do other stories on this YouTube channel. Normally do one a week, 4 p.m. on a Thursday, Central European time. And you can also message me and tell me what you'd like me to talk about. But I think let's stick on Qatargate and keep the comments coming in. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Thanks so much for joining. Have a good evening.